land mammals. They are warm-blooded, they have more or less constant body temperature. They breathe air with their lungs. And one of the important things for cetaceans is that they have to plan their breathing. They don't breathe automatically like we do. And they breathe through the opening on the top of the head, which we call the blowhole. And they give birth to live young. And these young suckle mother's milk, just like in cats, dogs, cows, and humans. So, of course, they have a number of adaptations to the marine environment. They have a hydrodynamic shape. They don't have any hair, apart from some vestigial hair that is there when they get born. Their front legs turn into pectoral fins or flippers, which they use to maneuver. They also completely lost their back legs. They completely disappeared. They're only found as small bones on which some of the muscles are appended. And they developed a separate tail tube which they use for propulsion. And the tail tube, as you can notice, is different from that in the fish. It's not vertical, it's horizontal, and they move it up and down, which has to do with the fact that they breathe air. They also have a dorsal fin, which is used for both stabilization during swimming and for thermal regulation. Although there are some species that actually don't have dorsal fins, so in some species it was not deemed as important. They have a lot of myoglobin in their muscles because they dive a lot, so they store a lot of their oxygen stores in their muscles, not in their lungs. Yeah, that's why their muscles are very dark, because they're full of myoglobin. Their skin is quite smooth and very delicate, which I think would become obvious and important when Paolo talks about veterinary responses. They have because they don't have hair, they have a thick layer of underskin fat, which we call blubber, to keep them insulated. And because they spend the entire life in the water, they're not built for on-land gravity, which again becomes important when we find stranded cetacean on the shore. Now, basically, we divide cetaceans into toothed whales, or odontoceti, and baleen whales. And toothed whales have teeth, although again, not all species actually have it. Some species of beaked whales have lost teeth subsequently. And they feed on fish, cephalopods, crustaceans, and some of them, such as killer whales, even prey marine birds and marine mammals, as you probably know. And then the baleen whales, they don't have teeth, obviously. They have baleen plates, which are hanging from the top of the jaws. And they use them to filter small prey like fish and crustaceans. You've probably heard of krill, which is small crustaceans found in the oceans. Now, generally speaking, when we say cetaceans, we mean kind of whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And this is a very artificial division. It's not taxonomic. It's just like a generally speaking. In reality, there are several families which are distinguished by their morphology and so on. But generally speaking, whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And when we say whales, we usually mean the big guys, like the blue whale, which is the biggest animal on the planet. Things like humpback whales, all the way down to certain beaked whales, which are one of the least known animals on this planet. Actually, there are some beaked whales which were never photographed or filmed ever alive. Never. Everything we know about them is just based on dead animals, or even just on bones, on skeletal remains. So if you think about it, we actually have some pretty big animals living on the planet that nobody has documented. It's quite interesting. Then the next group is dolphins, and most of these comprise one single family, delfinidae, and the biggest member of the dolphin family is orca or killer whale. But then there are also river dolphins down in the bottom right corner, which are actually not the same, taxonomically the same group of animals. They live in the rivers, and each of them actually represents a separate family. And last but not least, the porpoises. In the old times, they also used to call dolphins porpoises, but actually nowadays we distinguish porpoises as a separate family. And the thing that makes them different from dolphins is the shape, primarily the shape of the teeth. It's not conical like in dolphins, but it's rather kind of strangely diamond shaped in the end. And all of these species have that, and that is the main thing that distinguishes them from dolphins. In most cases, it's quite hard to tell males from females. Some cetaceans are sexually dimorphic, like the killer whales, for example. The males here have usually a huge and very upward pointing dorsal fin, which can be even 2 meters high. The females usually have it much more low and more curvy. In sperm whales, capodoidy, the males are twice the size of females, which is a huge difference. But in most other species, actually, males are not sexually different morphology than females, and so in the wild, it's often very hard to actually say this is a male or this is a female. One way we can tell if it's a male or female is if there is a calf present consistently next to an adult dolphin. That usually implies that the adult is a female, because males don't take part in raising their young. But this has to be based on some kind of a long-term consistent pattern. If we just see a calf next to a dolphin for 1 second, it could also be a male just temporarily babysitting the calf. The other option of telling the gender is by looking at the genital area here. And in males, the genital opening is usually clearly separated from the anal opening. But in females, it's usually not. It looks like one continuous slit. And females also usually have visible mammary glands where the milk comes out when the calves suckle milk. So this is a way of telling them apart. But again, these kind of photos are relatively rare in the wild, so it's not always very easy to say what we're dealing with. In terms of reproduction, dolphins and other cetaceans are known to be slow reproducing species. They don't have many calves, and they take a lot of time to grow up. And when they mate, the male swims underneath the female. And dolphins are one of the few animals for which we know that that copulation is not necessarily linked to reproduction only. It can also be just for pleasure, for maintaining social bonds in the group, and so on. But if it is for reproduction, then after about 1 year, depending on the species, the female gives birth to one single calf, and this calf is not able to survive on its own. It's dependent on the mother for, in some species, 1 year, in other species up to 4 or 5 years. In case of most dolphins, this time is usually 3, 4, sometimes 5 years, even up to 8 years. And during this time, when the calf is growing up, it's of course suckling mother's milk, which is very rich in fat, much more than, for example, cow milk. And the babies really grow rapidly from day to day. And during this time, they also learn to communicate with the mother, to communicate with other dolphins. They develop their so-called signature whistles, which means each animal has a different sound of their vocalization, which makes it uniquely identifiable to other dolphins and also to us if we have appropriate equipment. We often talk about cetaceans as family type of animals, which is not always true. They have a very complex social structure, and this can vary from species to species. Some species do have family matrilineal societies, like killer whales or pilot whales or sperm whales. They have oldest female, usually a grandma, and then the sons and daughters of that females, and then her grandsons and granddaughters. And in killer whales, this group structure is very, very stable. They're always the same group traveling together. But then in some other animals, like bottlenose dolphins, which live around here, Tursiope in Italian, they don't have family-based ties. They live in so-called vision fusion societies where groups mix a lot, they change, they join into bigger groups, divide into smaller groups, and so on. But then there are also some solitary animals, such as humpback whales or some river dolphins, which only are either found alone or in small or in pairs, and just rarely in bigger groups, just for reproduction. They also, because they live in the water, their sensory systems have to be different from ours. For us, vision is the primary sense for most of us, and 90% of the information we take in from the environment is based on eyesight. But for that, dolphins cannot use vision as much because underwater the light dissipates very quickly, and so vision is not always very useful. Some of the species still do have good vision, but it's not their primary sense. The primary sense is hearing, because underwater sound travels about 5 times faster than through air. So being able to communicate and find your way around by hearing is actually a good thing. And cetaceans in general make 2 types of sounds. One type is the communicative sound, which are usually whistles, but not always. And then the other type is so-called clicks, which they use to navigate around, to find prey, to localize prey. And we call this echolocation because they vocalize, the sounds travel out, they bounce from fish, from boats, from rock, and they come back to the animal, and the animal analyzes the sound and knows exactly where things are in their environment. And because this is an echo bouncing back, we call it echolocation. They don't have any sense of smell because in the water, if you're breathing air, that's not very useful. And they do have a very sophisticated sense of touch. Also, when they swim in groups, the touch is very important in their lives. They constantly rub against another, touch each other with moves, and so physical contact is very important for them. And there's still a lot of research going on whether they can actually taste things very well. There is some research showing that some baleen whales might actually find patches of prey based on taste, but this is still very, very young part of science. And also potentially magnetism. There are some magnetite crystals in their brains,